So do you think it's good to get started now? We're good to go, Kaisa? Okay. All right. So welcome, everybody. I'm Anoka Faruqee. I'm an artist and an educator. I just wanted to let everybody know that we are live streaming this meeting on YouTube via the Artists for Democracy YouTube channel. And it will live there as well as on the Artists for Democracy website. They have a really nice TV, A4D TV. I put the link in the chat if you want to check out some of their past artist talks, which I know they've had some really amazing artist talks. And they have some really amazing artist talks coming up on Tuesday nights. I know Christina Quarles and Lauren Halsey are speaking soon. So that's really exciting, and Laura Owens. So they have 3 more coming up in the series. So welcome, thanks for coming. I'm gonna start out by introducing our 2 guests. And then we'll go into some questions and some conversations, and we hope to have some time after we have our conversation for you all to put some questions in the chat or to ask some questions as well. All right, so I'm really happy to be joined by Prentiss Haney, who's here. Hi, Prentiss. Prentiss Haney is the co-executive director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, an innovative statewide organizing organization that unites community organizing groups, labor unions, faith organizations, and policy institutes across Ohio. OOC consists of 18 member organizations with members in every major metropolitan area across the state. The vision of OOC is to organize everyday Ohioans to build a transformative base of power for the purpose of achieving social, racial, and economic justice in Ohio. So welcome, Prentiss. And thanks for being here, because I know there's a lot going on and you're working around the clock to get people to vote in this election. So it means a lot that you took time out to be here with us. And our next guest is Marshall Shorts. Hi, Marshall. Marshall is an artist, designer, and brand strategist and award-winning entrepreneur. He is founder of Artfluential, a brand agency that harnesses design and strategy for social impact. He's also co-founder of Creative Control Fest and the Maroon Arts Group. He also serves on a number of nonprofit boards in the city of Columbus. Marshall has presented 2 TED Talks. He believes anything not designed by nature is designed by someone, so we can design places, spaces, and things that are more equitable for all people. He believes the ultimate success is the love from his family and village. So I'm really happy to have you both here. And I'm going to start with a question. I'll start with you, Prentiss. Can you tell us a little bit just about your background and how you got involved in the type of work you're doing now? What were the turning points? I call them aha moments that led you to this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little serendipitous that I'm gonna call full of artists, because part of how I got here is through art making. I'm Prentiss Haney. I'm both a community organizer and an artist. I grew up in a city called Dayton, Ohio. I don't know if anybody knows that, where that's located. A couple folks, great. So I grew up in a city where both my mom and my dad were entrepreneurs. So when the labor market didn't work out for them, or racism just pushed them out of jobs, they decided to create their own. My mom has been a beautician for over 25 years, and my dad has owned his own lawn care and landscaping business for 30 plus years. And so I grew up in a household with people who just went out and created the things they wanted to see. So I always had a sort of entrepreneurial spirit to me, and a curiosity about what I could do. I didn't really see limits as a child. And so what really drew me into this work was that, I was studying filmmaking, and I was actually in film school. And my first year in film school, I remember arriving on campus, and I was super excited about making films and learning about social justice documentary films. And I found out soon after I arrived on campus that my cousin who was just around the same age as me, wasn't going to be graduating from high school and also was going to be put into a foster care system. And my family didn't talk about it. And I didn't understand why we didn't talk about it. So I was just confused. I didn't understand the shame that ruffled me. And I was in this sort of like Ivy Tower situation, and people are like, you are on this path, but I didn't understand why I was the only one on this path. And so I searched for answers. And so through the journey of searching for answers and being in leadership on campus, I stumbled upon community organizing initially through a collective bargaining rights fight in Ohio that was fighting for the collective bargaining rights of public service employees in 2011, and then more personally in 2012 with Obama's reelection campaign, and then student organizing on campus. And so what really kind of like threw me in full gear was that as I was an artist and I was telling my own story, I wanted to figure out a way to like also enact social change in the world through my community. Like, what are ways I can like change politics in the world? And just really quick, fast story. I learned a big lesson in probably 2011 or 12. I was in an audition for my third year of my film school, and the film professors asked me like, what do I do? And I was like, oh, I do community organizing and activist work and this and that and all these different things. And then he asked me if I was willing to give up all that to make films. And I told them no. I was like, no, I wouldn't do that because those things make me who I am. And I ended up leaving that film program. And part of what I learned years later was that actually my integrity in that moment, clarity about who I was, is what they were looking for as an artist. And so I've been able to bring that integrity and that authenticity to my work and building power in communities. And that's why I'm here today, fighting so hard to make sure that our democracy is safe and that people who look like me, everyday Ohioans, can have a place that they can call home. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Prentiss, for that. Thanks for giving us that background info. It's really interesting to think about your relationship between art and justice in that story, and art and integrity. So we'll definitely come back to that. So now I want to ask Marshall the same question. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how you've come to do the work that you're doing, and what were your turning points and what were your aha moments?
Sure, sure. Hello, everybody. Good evening, rather. Thank you for having me. Thank Prentiss for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I am a Cleveland, Ohio native. I grew up in Cleveland proper, and that predominantly Black neighborhood. I went to Cleveland School of Arts, which was probably 98%, Black kids. At the school, and art was never separate. It was always a part of, our everyday life. And so I never really had to think about, being Black. It just was a normal, in terms of the art space. But when I ventured off to college and to pursue art and design as a career path, I was really confronted with the fact that I was a Black student and a Black artist in a space that was predominantly white and predominantly, in the art world, just classic trained and the curriculums and things like that. And so I had my freshman year had an encounter with a professor that sat myself and three other Black students aside, three Black boy students who were kind of struggling with some of the concepts. But to him, it was because we were putting too much culture in our work. And so I had never had to confront a design problem where culture wasn't informing how you solve that design problem. Now at the time I didn't have the language for that, but it was very jarring, and needless to say, retention was bad at our school, particularly with Black students. And so that really activated me to become active on campus and seek out, you know, colleagues and classmates who would organize around. We didn't even have an African art history class, so that's kind of that's where I got activated as a student, as a college student, around organizing. We started a group called African Cultural Awareness, and it is the longest running student group at Columbus College of Art and Design now, and student run. And I won't tell you how long ago that was because it'll make me feel old, but I graduated high school in 2001. So, and then beyond that, you know, just from where where I was from and what I saw in the day-to-day life, you know, it was always like art was a vehicle for me to connect to people. So people found out I had a talent for art. It was always a discussion that turned into more, you know, what do we see in the world? How are we experiencing those things? And a vehicle, I know it sounds cliche, it saved my life. What was normal walking out the door for me was all of the sort of stereotypical things that you could get into. That was normal. So art was a way for me to channel certain energy that was kind of surrounded around me at the time. And so post college, entrepreneurship was always something that I wanted to do since a child, but I found that the motivation for it was not so I could, you know, become like the Black me. It was more so that I could go back and bring that vehicle of creativity and art and the beauty I saw from my classmates and just, you know, kids in my neighborhood, and give them opportunities to express that, and it just stuck. And so that kind of transformed into creating events and curating, you know, conferences and community organizing centered around Black artists and Black, you know, design practitioners and activists. And so I connected with Prentiss through another organizer in our city, Molly. Last year, we've known each other for a number of years, and the opportunity came around to work with Ohio Organizing Collaborative and to lead our artist fellowship. And here I am today. So it's a pleasure, and I'll just kind of stop there. I'm sorry, my son is trying to call me. But yeah, that's really where my foundation, and a lot of the stuff we do is really grassroots on a local level. But through that work, we've been able to connect with artists and creatives around the world. And so I think, you know, it just shows the power that the cultural products we make has in turning the needle. I always say artists keep the pulse after the protests, and when everybody's kind of going back to the C-suite and going back to work and forgotten about what we were in the streets about. It's through the poetry, it's through the art that, you know, you are reminded that there's still this thing out there lingering, and there's still something that we need to be fighting for. So
yeah, thank you for that. I mean, one of the things that I'm really struck by with both of your stories is how you talked about getting active on campuses as kind of one of the defining moments for you, because I think that's really relevant to some people on this call who some of who are current students and who have been organized and organizing this past year. So that's really interesting. The other thing that I think you brought up, Marshall, is just the idea of like the artist keeping it going, like when the protest is over. And that is kind of a main question of this whole conversation around well, stamina and courage, I think, is part of it. But you know, I think one thing that I'll ask Prentiss has to do with that, has to do with time and the passing of time. And, you know, running this organization, how are you balancing like your long and short-term goals? Like, and how do you deal with that question of time and the short game and the long game?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. Um, a few things I would say is that first off, like, my organization, Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and then the project I built in 2017, the Midwest Culture Lab, which let me just say a thing about that, and it'll make sense why they exist together. After 2016, when the current president was elected, one of the things that was so troubling to me, other than everything, was the sort of stories and narratives that were coming out of the media, like the way that they were spinning the story about who we are and who our people are. When I live in Ohio, and so one of the stories that came out after the elections that white working class people showed up and showed out and defined this election. And that for almost a year, our country was obsessed with this, what they would call the white working class voter. And what I knew as a young Black queer person in Ohio was that there were all these other voices, all these other young people, queer people, people of color, not only in Ohio, but in the Midwest, who either didn't show up or have faced barriers to showing up, and their story was not in any of this conversation, and not in the conversation around any of this. And I think it was Abram Kiyende that talked a lot about what we would call the other swing voter, which is like the idea that people are not just like need to be mobilized or turned out. It's actually that people of color, young people, especially young people of color, are more likely than white people and older people to swing between voting for a Democrat and not voting at all. And it's rooted in because our political system does not recognize these groups of folks at the table of political agency. So the way that we show up in the streets, the way that we show up and talk about what we would like to see in the world is not recognized as true political agency. And so when then that group chooses not to engage or face barriers, they're either completely erased or they're put they're politically shamed. So if you shame people for not showing up, or you completely erase them from the story, like we saw in 2017, which is like actually they don't even matter, then what do you think our country goes from there? So I say all this to say, because Midwest Culture Lab was birthed out of that, was that actually in order for us to transform our nation in 4 years, we cannot forget the stories and the narratives of young people of color in the Midwest who are reimagining politics and democracy every single day. And they're doing it, like you said, in the poetry shops, they're doing it in communities, they're making makeup videos, they're literally talking about the world differently. However, because they're not Ava DuVernay or Anderson Cooper, they don't have a platform that's going to reach millions of people. But the folks they're reaching are all the people no one knows how to talk to. The people in community that know that these political campaigns don't have their numbers, that they don't even know where they live or what they experience, honestly. These folks are artists and creators. And so when I think about that there's millions of grassroots artists and creators who have, as an organizer, I would call them a base, but you all would call them an audience of people who are listening to you and how you're shaping the world and their imagination. And then there's community organizing groups like the one that I run that is shaping the political imagination of people who are politically involved. But if we look at these two groups, the reason why people are showing up and doing politics are the same reasons why people are showing up and talking about what their lives are and the stories they want to tell in artistry and why they're listening to those artists. How can we get those people in closer alignment and closer community so that artists can see that they know they not only have the gift of storytelling and creation and political imagination, but they also have the power of a voice that can move people. And that is a responsibility. So the reason why I say all this is that in the short and long term, what would it mean in the short term to equip artists and creators with the ability to mobilize and activate their audiences based on their political imagination? That's the first piece. And the great thing about artists and creatives is that the things we create in the world don't just exist in a moment. They become like cultural artifacts that live beyond the moment. And so it becomes a live archive of where we've been and where we go, and people get to continue to experience it. And what happens when people get to experience things over and over again and in community, it becomes culture. That's like the breeding grounds of culture. So how do we use the arena of politics to breed new culture? What artists at the center? And so that's what we've been doing in the Midwest Culture Lab in partnership with the OOC, is bringing the political work, the hard work, no shortcuts, and building power and cultivating relationships with people and community, and then helping to equip artists to understand that they have so much more power, and that if they choose to and they want to, they could take responsibility for the relationships of their audience and actually move to not only create things that are important in this moment, but create culture that lasts beyond this moment.
Thank you for that, Prentiss. Yeah. um, I think that's really powerful what you're talking about with this idea of culture and what is culture, and the place where the political intersects with the artistic is this cultural realm, right? And the fostering of culture, the building of culture as being like central to this idea of building power is really interesting. And also artists knowing their power, knowing that they have this voice and this ability to move people. And that's what they do as artists when they're making art. That's what they're doing, is they're thinking about how am I going to move somebody with this work. And then the idea that there's this storytelling, or there's this that can be deepened as a kind of activation, right? Is really interesting. And I'm wondering too, Marshall, in terms of that question of activation, and even as it comes to like mobilization, activation, and like how do you see the artist in that?
Yeah, I would echo everything Prentiss said. I always love hearing him talk. I know you mentioned I had a couple TED Talks, but just hearing him talk every day is a TED Talk. So I just want to say that I'm privy to that. But to answer your question, I think and I'll just start with the artist fellowship that we're kind of wrapping up actually this coming week. And what you find is like it's almost a convincing of artists that they have power, and being able to have spaces like the one we're in tonight that talks about how that power is used and how we're using mobilizing or how we're using art to ask the questions. But oftentimes we leave it at asking the questions. We kind of leave it out there in the dark. And so what I've done more in most recent years is organize around art making as opposed to like being the art that is featured and things like that. And so for me, it's around like, showing artists that, you don't have to just be the person making the art. We can engage people in the making of art with us, so that one, they appreciate the craft and they grow, and it grows that appreciation. But two, it becomes a vehicle to connect to people who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves artists and don't often get in the practice of it. But it also allows us as art practitioners to be in the practice of being in community with people, as opposed to, just kind of sitting in our silos and just sharing what we want to share. And so, I think, when we talk about culture, we often talk about like the products of culture. So the things we produce in culture, but we don't talk about that there's no culture without people. And so like people are at the center. People is what makes culture. It's not necessarily the things that we produce that make the culture. It all kind of works together. And so, the conversations I'm having with artists right now, who are very like discouraged in this moment, right? is a lot of cynicism that's happening, and it's tough conversation. A lot of them are losing inspiration to create art. And so I think, it's a question of like, what when we kind of use capitalism to frame how we make our art, and it just becomes about that. And we aren't seeing that, 100 years ago, if you were an artist, that was for the collective. You know what I mean? It wasn't a such thing as a megastar around. There was not a Beyonce per se, right? Like it wasn't something that you did to make a lot of money. And so it's like a cyclical thing that we can do. And it's a part of, and so we get back to that part of art where it's like, it's for the benefit of the collective, it's for the benefit of the people. And if you make some money along the way, that's great. But that is not the only vehicle for which this is created for. And I had that mentality at a point. And I made less art. I was less creative because I thought that if I wasn't monetizing it, it didn't have much benefit to me. I needed to, make some money. And so part of it is getting past the barriers that we have around, like, and that really exposes the power of what we do in the community. And I challenge people who don't consider themselves artists to make sure artists are in the room at the beginning of the conversation, not when you want a mural to go up. You know what I mean? Because we have other things to contribute outside of like our labor.
Yeah. So a couple of things you brought up that I think are really important. One is the collective, and also the other is like who we make art for, and what is that collective, and how do we make art independent of just thinking about it as a market structure. But also you both brought up relationships, and I wanted to talk a little bit about relationships because I know that you use a relational methodology in your organizing, but also, I think that a lot of people on this call have, relationships with friends, with family. There's an election coming up, and there's a big question on a lot of people's minds about engaging those relationships in a conversation about voting, about the election, about points of view. So I've talked to students who have expressed hesitation and, in terms of talking to friends, talking to peers. I've heard from students who don't really know how to talk to their parents about. So I'm just curious about the election, about what's going on in the world. And, sometimes it's easier to phone bank or text bank and talk to a stranger than it is to talk to a friend. And I want to unpack that a little bit because I feel like you both have a lot of experience, like thinking through that very question. Why do we avoid the people closest to us when we try to have conversations about things that are close to home and close to us and meaningful to us?
Yeah, I can go first, and I'll let Marshall talk about some of the creative pieces. But there's really my methodology around this is really two avenues for artists to do this. One, it's all about the power relationship. So the first thing is, how do you activate them through what we call relational organizing? And I'll let whoever the host is give me screen sharing privileges, and I'll show you a slide or two about it. And then the other piece, other than relational organizing, is like sometimes I call it social ambassadors or cultural ambassadors. So how do you leverage your ability to tell stories as a way to bring people in and then take responsibility for those relationships? And I think with those two programs, it requires the same two things: responsibility and courage. Because if we don't take responsibility for what's ours, our relationships are ours. That's our responsibility to step in and be able to move them down a path. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes a lot of courage to create art and create a whole bunch of things, but you must have courage. So I'm going to talk about the relational pieces first, and then I'll let Marshall talk about the sort of courage that you need to create art and also take responsibility for your artists. For your audience to move them into action. So when we're doing relational organizing, I'm going to explain what that means first. It is super simple. Anoka Faruqee, we just talked about it yesterday, and I recorded it on my phone. I thought about showing it to you, but it's super simple. But a relational organizing is a program built through recruiting community leaders and artists who are committed to turning out their friends and family. And the key ingredient is that leaders utilize their existing relationships to urge people that they already know to get involved in local campaigns and take action, like turning out the vote. So literally, if you are a community leader, you are all community leaders because you have an audience, people who follow you. You have a conversation with your friends and family about why this election is important to you. And what happens through that is literally a multiplier effect in our community. If I was and I'm a diehard community organizer, if we were in the era of being able to go outside safely and do our work, I would knock 100 doors. If I were to hit 100 doors during this season, I probably would talk to maybe two to four, maybe 10 people if I'm lucky, if I knock 100 doors. That's just the nature of door canvassing at this point. It's still a very effective tactic. If I text 20 people that I know, my mother, my sister, my uncle, my friend from college, and I talk to them about why this election is so important, and I talk about what's at stake for me in this election, I am likely to get over 50, 60% more people through that conversation. And let me tell you a little bit of a secret. The people in your phone right now are the most important people to talk to. They're the most important list for you to reach out to. And guess what? You are the most persuasive person to get them to show up and vote. Because in a moment like this, where we're in a crowded environment and there's so much coming at us and so much disinformation, what people really want to hear is someone that they know, but like, hey, have you made a plan to vote yet? Do you want me to show you how to do it? And okay, let me talk to you about why it's so important for me. And I guarantee you, if you did that, you would turn out more people in this election than any other tactic that you do. And I want to just show you one more thing before I jump in. Well, two more things. So we use an app called Outvote. Outvote is not magic. It's just an app to be able to track our reach and how many people we're reaching through it. But the courageous thing is us actually talking to our friends. I did a training about a couple months ago where I was doing relational organizing, and we were inviting people out to a childcare event and getting them excited about the election. In that training, I made a relational list. The first person on the list was my sister. My sister, who has a nephew who is 4 years old. My nephew, excuse me. He's 4 years old, little black chocolate baby. And I noticed she was struggling with childcare. She was an essential worker, and she was trying to figure out how she was going to get her 4-year-old son into care because the daycare that she was in was closed because of COVID. And so I called her to invite her to a meeting about childcare and the future of childcare and how we need to fight for it and why we need to elect the very best Ohioans to fight for childcare. When I tell you that was the most scary conversation I've ever had, because I had to tell her why I cared about this, why I felt like, I want to make sure my nephew Donovan is able to be cared for, and why I want her to show up and vote and be a part of this conversation. And guess what she said? She said yes. And so even with all of the fear that may come up, people trust you. They trust what you have to say. And so no one else can do this but you. And I guarantee you, if you do it, you can make the difference. And I can tell you why. Remember what I said earlier? There are millions of other swing voters, people who are thinking about swinging between voting Democrat or not voting at all. And the most persuasive person to help them see their political agency is you. And so we are running the Ohio Organizing Collaborative is actually running the second largest relational organizing program in the country, because we believe in the power of our relationships so much. Right now, our network reach, yes, our network reach is about 300,000 Ohioans through our 1,200 volunteers who are engaged in our program. Ohio is neck and neck in the polls. And so literally, I remember in 2019, a school board race was decided by one vote. Me and my other friend went to go vote in that election right before we went on a plane to DC. This is the kind of stakes that we're in this year. So if I could say anything to you, is that you should reach out to your friends and family now. If you want to do it with us, we do it every Tuesday, every Thursday, and every Saturday. Tuesday and Thursday at 6 o'clock. I'll drop the link in here, the volunteer link, and Saturday at 6. It doesn't matter where you're at. We'll train you, and you'll be able to talk to your friends and family, and we'll be able to model to you how you do that. So as artists, as people who are helping shape political imaginations, I know that you are equipped to have courageous and curious conversations with your family. And I implore you to take a leap and do that, because you could literally be the person that helps change where our country goes next. So that's my spiel on relational organizing. And then I will pass it to Marshall to talk a little bit about social cultural ambassadors and the role of art making. Maybe you could show some of our pieces we made.
Oh, what I'm saying about Prentiss. I'm inspired. Yeah, I'll jump in and just add that, you know, when it comes to, you know, artists and sort of using cultural ambassadors, it really is around, like, you know, centering the conversation about what they care about. And so, and then pulling that out to, you know, voting being an aspect of changing what you care about, right? And so maybe you're discouraged and you don't feel like your vote matters, but you do feel like, you know, decriminalizing marijuana does, right? And so if you can then say, well, you talk about this in your music, you talk about this in your poem, you know, you throw a blunt leaf behind, you know, every picture you do or your design, right? There's a bill in Ohio that's coming up that will impact your ability to talk about that freely or recreationally, right? And so, you know, relating it to something that is very personal, that has impact on you where you are, is important. And that's how I've been able to sort of break through some of the difficult conversations that I'm having with artists and people in my community. I'll talk. So one of the ways that we use, I would consider myself locally anyway, somebody that has some influence. I'm a member of Greater Columbus Arts Council. I'm a new board member there. And so for me, it's about, you know, as Prentiss said earlier, how do we bridge this gap between the cultural products that we produce, our art, and systemic change? And I say systemic change, that includes like voting and changing the narrative around how we are actively engaged. So one of the pieces that we are kind of roping into the work we're doing in Ohio is this Deliver Black Dreams piece. So if Black Lives Matters, then we must commit to delivering Black dreams. And Columbus was a hotbed for a lot of the organizing and protesting. And so the city wanted to do, we were a little behind. We wanted to do a big, you know, Black Lives Matters mural on the street, which is cool. But, you know, it was more form than function. and I say that to say, like, you know, sometimes these things become window dressing. And so I feel like that was an opportunity now to connect something that, you know, we had the ear of city council with, we had some of the corporations here that were like, oh yeah, we want to do a mural to connect that to some work that is kind of centered around the vote and engaging Black people around voting, which is the piece that we're doing, you know, Prentiss and I called Deliver Black Dreams. And so that was an opportunity for me to say, look, we're doing this campaign over here around getting people out and getting active in the vote. There isn't necessarily an art arm of it, but let's add this to that campaign because this will have much farther reach, and it won't just be local. This will be around something that'll be happening at least regionally. And so what we were able to do was raise about $75,000 from City Council. Huntington Bank gave $50,000 to erect 3 to 5 murals in the city of Columbus, centering around delivering Black dreams. And so now that message will be carried, or that hashtag will go out into the world, but it'll be connected to, work around voting. It'll be connected to work around, racial and social justice. It'll be connected to work around education. And so that's an opportunity for us to now, again, connect the things that we do, the optics, the form, to some function that is something that is pushing function. And my background is industrial design, so I'm big on like something working and the aesthetics. So for me, art isn't just a vehicle to cover up windows and look pretty. It should be connected to some form of some function, some systemic change. And I think that's the power in what we do. And we can ask those questions through this art. And now, because the city of Columbus said we're committed to delivering Black dreams on record, the press release went out the other day. Now we can hold you accountable, right? Now we can say this is what this actually looks like. And we know that delivering Black dreams is delivering the dreams of Black people, brown people, white folk, indigenous folk. And so that to me is kind of like the most recent example of how we now start to connect and bridge these gaps. Conversation with City Council. Now we're in the conversation with the mayor, and now artists have a platform to have more of a voice, and we can say, look, y'all said y'all committed to this, right? And we can hold you accountable to that. And we have visual benchmarks to show that you said that you're committed to these things. So that, I hope that's what you were, kind of getting that, Prentiss. And with your question is, how do we connect these things? How do we connect the dots with these things? Another example I might give, and I'll keep this one short, is I'm a co-founder of a local nonprofit, Maroon Arts Group. It started on a fluke, I'll be honest. We brought a play to Columbus that looked at the etymology of the N-word, called A Real Nigga Show. And we sold it out, and people were like, what are y'all doing next? 5 years later, we erected a box park made of shipping containers where we have a gallery, a performance space, and we were able to be sort of a landing ground for protests when they needed rallies or places that you could be socially distant outside, to have conversation and teach people, how to take protests now to the ballot box, or how to take protests now to, creating, organizing into more. And so I think, artists tend to minimize our power to the thing we make, and not looking at the vast amount of opportunities we have to have this conversation over and over again. Because when you are good at your craft, people listen to you. You have an opinion. That's why people are running around listening to Kanye, right? And so if you have something of substance to say, and we can be most courageous through the art that we make. And I meant to say that at the beginning, because that's often how we express, the hard things that we say. So I would say start with your art, have that conversation in your art, and then, share that. And then, use that courage to kind of push that conversation. I love to play the background. It's really for me to be the center of attention. So I was hesitant about this press release and things going out, but I also realized, there's so much at stake. And so, if we can use this as a vehicle to enact change, then it's our duty. It is our responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That's really amazing and really inspiring to hear both of you speak to the power of artists and the power of individuals and the power of relationships. I wanted to point out that Prentiss did put the link in the chat for the vote parties, virtual vote parties, which is a really great thing. And there's, I just went to the site, and they're happening like every week, several times a week. So that's awesome. So you all can go there and register and kind of get deeper into this whole, yeah. Prentiss is saying, come on over. Bring some friends, open arms, let this grow. Build on that power that you have. I also know that, we're coming up on, I want to make sure that the people here have a chance to ask questions and to make comments too. So you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, I think, and ask your question or make your comment for Marshall or Prentiss. You must have something on your mind.
You're muted.
Tamashi. Oh, Tamashi, were you trying to say something? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you're muted. Oh, no, I thought you were saying something.
I'm just going to call on you, Tamashi. I'm going to pretend I'm...
Of course.
I'm going to pretend I'm still your teacher.
You still are. I mean, you always will be. I was hollering to the other room to repeat everything that's being said in here to my best friend who's resting in, who organizes around economic democracy. Basically, this is what we talk about and dream about and work toward all the time. I am loving this conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. Dion Custer Edwards is here from the Wexner Center for the Arts. And I guess I'm mouthing off in the chat. So I'm just I'm taking notes because I
love it.
I don't know. I relate. I feel like you're echoing as artists and organizers. I don't consider myself an organizer, but I organize things sometimes. And so I'm listening to this art school experience about, I love art students because so many of us take this risk that doesn't make sense to a lot of people in our families unless we come from a family with successful artists in it already. We take this risk and step out on faith to learn our craft. And then as Marshall was saying, those of us who grew up in Black communities in which blackness and Black creativity were Black humanity is normal and not up for debate. We find ourselves, those of us who end up going to predominantly white institutions, which so many art institutions are, which is fascinating to me, that so much energy has to be systemically put into making a space so, so free of so many people of color. When we know American culture tells us that Black people, brown people, indigenous people of color in this country are the roots of what becomes popular culture. We create so as not to cry, so as not to shriek and scream and pull our hair out. We create to facilitate joy for each other and with each other. Our creations create whole economic systems from which other people suckle like baby calves at a cow. But somehow we go into these school spaces and we're hyper minoritized and run headlong into this incredible discouragement that sometimes comes directly from our peers. And it's very disorienting. So to hear Marshall talk about saying this is who I am. I believe in justice. I believe in people. I believe in organizing. And then being told that somehow that's mutually exclusive, that art, justice, and community are mutually exclusive from formally developing your craft is insane, but that it's so common. So I don't know. I'm just enjoying this all across the board. Dion and I have worked on a show that just opened at the Wexner Center for the Arts called Love Roller Coaster.
Yes.
5 new paint. You know what I'm doing there, right? Shout out to Dayton. Shout out to Dayton's connection to Oakland, California, and the originators of funk. It's called Love Roller Coaster. It's about our highs and lows and often perverted relationship with the franchise of democracy, or the myth of American democracy, and how we actually experience it as Black people, which is so often met with resistance to our access, questioning our ability to participate in as citizens, violence, deterrent. suppression. And then like these highs of incredible accomplishment and achievement where we break down walls, where we build community together, and where we get out the vote and we change things. You know, the arc of I love it when people say, you know, partially quote King and say that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, with leaving the part out about like the work has to be done to, anyone who's taken a metal class knows that metal is not going to bend on its own. nothing that dense bends on its own. We are the ones who have to do the work to do the bending. So yeah, so it's a show, and it includes a soundtrack. It includes a soundtrack of conversations. Actually, the whole show is inspired by conversations with Black Ohioans, because I couldn't be there because of COVID, who talked to me, including Dion, who organized the conversations for me. We started with the security staff at the Wexner Center, who happened to all be Black. We talked about why they vote, where they vote, when they first voted, what the franchise means to them. And those conversations are mixed in with 7 tracks from the Ohio Players catalog, after which all of the paintings are named. So right now I'm low-key fantasizing about having private conversations with the two of y'all and adding you to the soundtrack. I'm fantasizing about all kinds of things. Yeah, and there's a project that I want you to know about called Boston Ujima Project. It's the nation's first democratically governed investment fund with the sole purpose of investing in and supporting businesses in Boston owned by Black people, brown people, indigenous people, who commonly, historically, are completely cut off from formal avenues of capital. And it's like, and it's an economic ecosystem with art and culture as a part of the ecosystem. So I'm just loving this and imagining partnerships, like literally.
I love it. Thank you.
That's going.
I do have a video I can share that we can.
Oh my gosh, cool. Somebody.
Before you share the video, Marsha, I think that's probably not how we want to close. I want to answer this question. It was 2 questions. One, there was a question about donations to Walk the Walk. I don't know anyone from Walk the Walk who might want to answer that. Okay.
Yeah, I can answer the Walk the Walk because I'm one of the co-leaders for Walk the Walk, and they're starting phase 3, which launched this week. Actually, right now during this call, they're doing their first deep dive into phase 3 on Zoom. So those of you who don't know Walk the Walk was started by some friends, and it was my sister's roommate's husband. So I got involved. It's very relational. It was relational fundraising. So we fundraised for several grassroots voter organizations in 8 swing states. We raised, just totally surprising to us because we thought we could maybe raise 200,000. We raised $2 million, closed a lot of funding gaps. And now we can't stop. We can't stop. We were supposed to stop because we all have other jobs and stuff. We were supposed to stop at the end of September, but we can't stop. We won't stop. And phase 3, they did a lot of research. They identified 11 candidates, state legislature candidates, all people of color, Black or Latinx, in swing states, in key districts that we're supporting, we're fundraising for through the month of October. So we're going to keep going with that. And, the idea is, and this relates to what has been said here tonight, is expanding the electorate is really not only effective, but it's the right thing to do. And it's the only way forward. It's the only path forward to change the conversation, because we have not had, as Tamashi said, a true democracy. We will not have a true democracy until people are enfranchised. And so that is the spirit of Walk the Walk. And that is why Walk the Walk is not stopping right now. So please, come to the next deep dive is on Sunday. The other exciting thing that I'm super excited about, and I'll post the link, because so many artists have supported Walk the Walk through raffles, through benefits, through t-shirt designs. Angela, who's here, did an awesome t-shirt. I'm Biden the Bullet. was the Enmala did it. So many artists got involved. Walk the Walk decided to offer the candidates volunteer support. So you can go to walkthewalk.com if you have skills, and I know you do, in terms of web design, graphic design, social media, video editing. You can volunteer with one of these candidates. And we're actually supporting 11 candidates financially, but the slate of candidates that we're supporting through volunteer support can get bigger if more volunteers come forward. So we're trying to raise a bunch of money, and Tamashi's helping because Tamashi's going to hold a fundraiser premiere after party on October 24th for Walk the Walk. So we're doing all those things still. So yeah, we're still fundraising. So I put the did I put it in the chat?
Yeah, the volunteer.
Okay, that's the one from you. Let me get the Walk 2020. Get involved. So this is the page where you can see where the Zoom sessions are, and also you can sign up to volunteer with those skills. And there's also there was another question from Elizabeth, which was, want to answer that one, Prentiss?
Yes. So Elizabeth was like, I love the questions that you need to ask your friends and family. Do you have a voting plan? How can I show you how to vote? And then let me tell you why it's important. If you have those 3 questions, you'll do excellently. The second question of can I show you how to vote? That one, you don't have to have all the answers to. You can just go to vote.org, which will have all the information around local races, how do you cast your ballot in your state, your local rules. You don't have to be an expert. You just need to actually have them commit to making a plan, and then we can work together to figure it out. So just use vote.org. If you're in Ohio, you can use ohiovote.org, but just use vote.org and it'll get you to where you need to go. And then the last thing I want to do, because it's 9:30, is that I want to show you a piece of art that we made that's connected to our campaign and our work. I'll actually let Marshall talk about the artists who created, and then I'll let the video speak for itself.
Yes, thank you. This has been a pleasure to be in this conversation. I just want to lift up before I show the video. If you're not from like Ohio or Columbus, Dion Custer-Edwards is a local legend. I miss you. I wish I could see you in person, but I just wanted to shout her out. She's truly a gem to our community. She's helped us run writers' residencies and things like that. Two, another thing that I encourage, and this was just kind of taught in my, bag of mentorship, is that, if you know how to do something, you can teach it. And so we're a big proponent of learning communities here. Even if it's just, a 4 or 5 week meetup once a week. We're doing one currently about the movie Judas and the Messiah, about Fred Hampton, where, we're talking about the life of Fred Hampton, but we're looking at it through the lens of art, through the movie, right? And so preparing people to have the discussion about the art, where they don't necessarily have to be artists, but we can engage in dialogue around art, activism, in a cultural moment. So those are the 2 things. And then the video we're going to show is called All of Us. The photos and the imagery you'll see was shot by local artists and photographers. It was edited by a local videographer. And the music you'll hear, hopefully you can hear when I play it, is by a local artist named T1. And the photographer's name is John Landry. His company's called Top 5 Photography, and they documented a lot of the unrest that was happening in Columbus. And a videographer who helped me sort of edit and get the story right. His name is Charles Harrison. And so, again, just pulling talent from multiple places to create one piece and working together with creators in our city. So let me share my screen with you real quick. It's not letting me. Oh, there we go. Make sure I share my sound as well.
It's been such a long ride. Feels like every night is the last time. No peace, no joy now, no sunlight. Yeah. I can't feel my side if you just call my name. I'll be there, yeah. I'll be there.
So that you might see that circulating out on your social media channels. And if you want to know the name of the artist, he's on not SoundCloud, what's Spotify and iTunes and all of that. And I forgot to mention, like, Prentiss wrote the script, so didn't want to negate the copy contribution. So yes, thank you for having us, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prentiss and Marshall, for the work that you do every day. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Dion, unmute yourself. You got to meet now that the room is depopulating. You have to meet Anoka Faruqee and Mark Aronson. I was at